Good morning, bro. It is Tuesday, August 21st, 2018, and welcome back to the Ghetto Scholars Podcast, man. My name is Charlamagne. I be reading books and shit, and I want to smoke a joint and talk to you about them. Around the first of every month, I drop a long-form podcast about a book, a person, place, event, or subject that I did a little bit of research on. And in between the first of every month, I just want to check in with you guys, see how everything's going, see how your month's going, maybe answer any questions that you had from the last podcast, and maybe recommend a book for you if you're into that sort of thing. So to the two of you who downloaded the last podcast a couple of weeks ago, thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something. I know I did. So last weekend, though, I had the pleasure of reading a book by a guy who I gotta admit I really didn't care for when I first saw his interviews online. But after reading his story, coming to understand his thought process, and learning how he explains himself, I have a lot more respect for him and what he's been able to accomplish in his life. And with this book, which is titled Black Privilege, subtitle Opportunity Comes to Those Who Create It. So, Charlamagne the God is a radio personality from small town South Carolina, and he got his notoriety from basically shitting on people, and often to their face. But he's got a style that I think he's taken from the local radio stations in South Carolina to years later being on a nationally syndicated radio show, which is the Breakfast Club. That style I think is rooted in the streets, because Charlamagne had been locked up, he sold dope, fired from a bunch of jobs, and admits to being an overall scumbag for most of his life. But what he's learned from these experiences, he's distilled into these 8 distinct chapters or principles that I think are a good starting point for the homies who want to get started on that path for self-development or self-improvement, but don't want to get into anything too complex like the Art of War or the Book of Five Rings. Like, this book really ain't that deep. If we're being honest, there aren't a lot of references or research put into it, but it is full of valuable and pretty good advice considering who his audience is, which is goofy motherfuckers like myself. But these kinds of books I've tended to avoid lately because I get the feeling that they're just cash grabs and transitionary products. And what I mean by that is that celebrities like Steve Harvey, Nicole Richie, hell, even Prodigy, write these type of books to signal a repositioning of their public persona. Politicians do this too. When they're thinking about running for president, they write like their life story and some type of memoir to kind of change how people perceive them or give them a little more insight into the nuances of their character. And it's not that, celebrities shouldn't write books. That'd be bougie on my part. But I just assume that they're not going to be good. It's like, what you going to write about? I used to be famous. I got lucky. I worked hard. Now I'm super successful. And hopefully my rags to riches story inspire you to follow your dream. Or some variation of that story, which is all, fine and dandy. But it's still kind of lame because like 100 of these books come out each year. So who wants to keep reading that same story over and over again? But that's why I like Charlamagne's book and the way that he broke his story down, because he could have easily wrote a straightforward memoir about his career so far, but instead he chose to write something that was more similar to like an instruction manual. And the first chapter of the book and several other parts of the book, if we're being honest, he kind of rambles. I mean, my guy talk about everything from ghosts to aliens and a bunch of other weird shit, but in between all of that, he dropped some jewels about Black history that I wasn't really familiar with, like the story of Denmark Vesey. Like, I knew the name Denmark Vesey, but I didn't know the details that Charlamagne shared in his book. And that type of stuff I can appreciate, because I'm a nerdy nigga and I like history and learning about history. So if you're able to sprinkle in some stuff that I never heard before, you got my vote. But he also a country nigga, and I can appreciate that too, because I'm a low-key country nigga. And I got a theory about country niggas heading north and doing some major damage. I'm talking about people like Larry Hoover, Frank Lucas, Tookie Williams, all these dudes from places like Mississippi, North Carolina, and Louisiana. So I don't know if it's something in the water or if it's something in the food that they feeding country niggas or something that city niggas ain't getting up north. But there's been a long history of dudes coming from down south, moving up north and making some major moves. But as the book goes on, Charlamagne gets a little bit more focused and the stories get a little bit more poignant. He tells one story about a friend of his who was driving dirty, and this guy had, a gun and some drugs in a car, and a police pulled up behind him, and he thought the police was going to pull him over, so he pulled out his gun and was getting ready to shoot the cop. But the cop hit his lights and went past him and pulled somebody else over. So the guy was like, oh, man, whew. God was looking out for me, man. I thought I was going to have to bang this dude. And Charlamagne was like, God wasn't looking out for you. He was looking out for that cop, you crazy motherfucker. And that's the kind of thoughtfulness that I don't think a lot of street dudes have in today's sort of do you culture, where we don't check each other on our bullshit. It's like, oh, well, that nigga, he was going to shoot the cop. Okay, well, I ain't going to check him on it. Even if I feel some type of way about it, I'm not going to confront this person on something that I think is wrong. And Charlamagne doesn't really have that reflex to not call people on their bullshit. And that's what I think this book is. It's a way for Charlamagne to call people on their bullshit excuses for not being successful, whether or not that's race, gender, or coming from an impoverished background. If you just look at some of the chapter titles, which are the names of these principles, they kind of show you where he's coming from. Like some of the titles are "Fuck Your Dreams" and "Put the Weed in the Bag," and this is shit niggas need to hear sometimes. Like, okay, who cares that you came from a rough background? So did I. You still got to put in that work. You still got to grind. You still got to make sacrifices if you want to be successful, no matter who you are. But also, some of the chapters of the book are kind of corny, or some of the titles, I should say, are kind of corny. Like "Live Your Truth," like that's a cliche I've heard so many times that it's just like, what if your truth is you're just an asshole or a womanizer or a crud ball? Like, I don't always agree with that. But he's got another one called "It's Not the Size of the Pond, but the Size of the Hustle in the Fish." And that just, there's something to that effect, and that just annoyed me. And it's not that the content of these chapters are garbage, because they're not. But it's just that the titles are just cliche and kind of weak. I don't know, man. I just might be nitpicking too, because I'm particular about that type of thing. You know, I think I'm smart. I got an English degree. But yeah, that he could have did better on the titles. But the point of the book wasn't to avoid cliches. And the most impressive thing about this story is how Leonard McIvy, you remember Monique went up there, Leonard. But how Leonard McIvy went from coming from a dirt road with no education to becoming Charlamagne the God, who's very likely going to be a major media mogul in the next decade or so. Like, he's already shaping up to be that person. And it's amazing to see a person come from, you know, beyond humble backgrounds to being a major force in this game. And it's interesting. This is not like, you know, Martin Luther King's story. And I know there's no comparison between Charlamagne and Martin Luther King. I'm not trying to make that comparison, but I'm trying to compare these stories, or at least juxtapose these podcasts that I'm putting up. But King was kind of bred for this. He was bred to be successful. He's bred to be a leader. But to come from a situation like Charlamagne's, where statistically you're supposed to be dead or in jail by a certain age, and instead, you know, you're negotiating radio and TV contracts for hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars, and you're rubbing shoulders with celebrities, man. You go on vacation to all these different countries and whatnot. Like, that's a major accomplishment. And we can't compare these stories. Like I said, we can't compare which one is more impressive between, you know, the greatest civil rights leader of all time and a radio personality, because they're two totally different eras, two totally different types of stories. But we can note how remarkable that spirit is. I mean, this story isn't unique to Charlamagne, this rags to riches story, because this is the American story. This is the American archetype. Just like, you know, Andrew Carnegie and the Great Gatsby. You know, Charlamagne might have more in common with Jesse Ventura than he does with Martin Luther King, just on account of him going into an arena where he doesn't have any training or expertise and then becoming a dominant force in that arena. King had been a public speaker, a leader, or organizer for a long time before he became like the face of the civil rights movement. And he had advanced degrees and went to college at the age of 14. And Charlamagne went to technical school for like a day and was like, fuck this shit. You know, I don't need to go to school to win at this game. And for the most part, he was right. And that's dope, you know, to believe in yourself and understand yourself well enough to will yourself into a position of notoriety and influence like he has is something that I think we can all take a lesson from. And then I have the insight to go, you know I have an interesting story to tell, but I also think that these 8 ideas helped me to get to where I am now. And I want to put these into a book for people to benefit from instead of just my life story on its own. You know, there are also parts of this book that are feeding into that persona shift that I talked about earlier. Sometimes memoirs serve as a means for people to clean up their public image. And Charlamagne spends like a whole chapter talking about, how progressive he is towards women and gay people and whatnot. And that's okay because it shows growth on his part, but it's still kind of pandering. Like, once I read that chapter, I was like, nigga, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. But hey, Charlamagne for president, man. He is growing as a person and seeing a lot more success based on those changes that he made in himself, man, and be able to write a book and put that out to folks like, look, these are the principles that I'm living my life by. And if you want to have any type of success that resembles mine, you might want to at least look at these. And, I don't know. I don't consider myself a serious person. I try not to take myself that serious. I can be a silly person, goofy dude sometimes. But some of these stories are just vulgar or unnecessary. To the point where I had to like drag myself through a few of these sections because it felt like some middle school shit, like a bunch of dick jokes. There's this one thing about his cousin / auntie, and you got to read the book to find out more about that cousin auntie situation. Stuff about him cheating on his girl, renting trains, all type of shit, which I can sympathize with because, I can be sort of scumbag myself, I understand, but it just got repetitive after a while and I just got bored with it. But the one theme, I guess, in this book that I didn't get tired of was the fact that Charlamagne didn't see himself as a victim. And that's, one idea that I think he wanted people to take away from this book, to understand that they're not victims and that they can use, the struggles of their lives as lessons to propel them to future success. And that's a good message. And that's one that I can get behind. And that's why I would recommend this book for anybody, looking for a quick read. Maybe a laugh or two. If I was going to rate it between 1 and 5, I give it a 3 out of 5. It's not groundbreaking. I don't think it was trying to be, but it is accessible and it is entertaining for the most part. Okay, that's it for me, folks. Like I said, this was just a quick check-in, book review. Check out Black Privilege, Opportunity Comes for Those Who Created by Charlamagne the God. It was a decent read. It's only about 280 pages, I think. I will be back on the 1st with another full episode. I'm actually working on that now. I think you guys are going to like it. If you fuck with the Ghetto Scholars podcast, please share it with a friend. Leave a review. Head to the GhettoScholarsPodcast.com to read the article I wrote about this book. Maybe buy a t-shirt from your boy. If you want to holler at me, you can reach out to me at KotaBang on Instagram. That's KOTA_BANG on Instagram. We also have an Instagram for the podcast, and it's just the Ghetto Scholars Podcast on Instagram. Shoot me a message if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions. Bars. Peace, peace, peace.